Hey everybody, welcome to the FreightWaves Enterprise Fleet Summit. I'm Thomas Wasson, our friendly resident trucking analyst here, and I'm super excited to be having not only for our keynote, but we're doing a new format. Look how fancy this looks. This is great. So we're going to be welcoming on Matt McLelland. He is the VP of Sustainability at Covenant. We'll be talking a lot about sustainability. It's something you see with big fleets. We're going to get his thoughts on a little bit of everything here. We're going to have kind of a less structured, formal conversation. We're just going to pick his brain, and we're going to have a wonderful time. So without further ado, let's go on to my guest. Matt, thank you so much for hopping on the show. Thanks for joining us in studio.
In studio, yeah. It's just a 20-minute drive down here. I'm glad to do it. I love being in studio. It's always great coming down here and seeing how all this stuff operates.
Yeah, and we're kicking it up. We're making it fancy, and I like your job because it's one of the things where you're part of your VP of Sustainability and Innovation at a large publicly traded trucking company. Tell us about your story in this role and kind of how trucking views this. Then we'll start diving into the nitty-gritty on some of the specific things that are on top of mind for fleets.
Sure. So first of all, let me brag on Chattanooga for a second, because Covenant is here. A lot of freight startups and other large publicly traded company that runs a lot of assets is here. Chattanooga's a great trucking town. I'm so glad to be in the ecosystem. I've been at Covenant for about 7 years. It's funny, I started in what was more of an innovation role back in 2018. I was brought in to sort of look at a lot of technologies, mostly software related, that we weren't looking at. And actually, it wasn't even a full-time job. It was a part-time job, but I was an employee of the company. And, Thomas, within about a year, something happened that I don't think any of us expected. Remember, it was around October. We got this RFP that asked us about autonomous trucks. And then a month later, it was about hydrogen and then electrification. And then we really didn't know how to answer these questions. And somewhere in sales, they said, well, that's what Matt does. Let's get him involved. And so to make a long story shorter, the role sort of evolved into a full-time role where I was developing our company's position on knowing everything there was to know about everything that wasn't diesel and bringing the best solutions to the leadership of the company to make sure that we weren't missing the boat, right? A little bit of FOMO, fear of missing out. We wanted to make sure that we could talk to every one of our customers, whether it was an RFP or in person, and share with them what the future of freight was going to look like. Future of freight.
Hey,
where have I heard that before? Yeah, so today the job is VP of Sustainability and Innovation. Sustainability, we can unpack that in a minute, came probably the bigger piece of that, where customers that are really cognizant and working towards lowering their carbon footprint, they need carriers like us, which is called Scope 3 emissions, which we can get into that. They want us to help them sort of achieve those goals. And so, yeah, it's a fantastic role. I love it. I get to work with sales, with marketing, with operations, basically all the different parts of our company. It's been a great role. Covenant's a great company. And so it's an exciting role. There are a few other people in our industry that have roles similar to this. J.B. Hunt has a role similar to this. Werner has a role similar to this. CR England has a role similar to this. And so, it's a great job.
And let's talk about, that blows my mind that it was on the RFP level, because I'm used to seeing, like, when I did the operations, you get 80,000 things, you'd go through each one, you'd put a rate. I never would have imagined that the customers, even that early on, before COVID, before the whole shebang, were like, I really want to get this. Talk about that time, whenever you got that and then you're moving towards it now. What were the biggest things that they were looking for? Did they just want chargers? Did they want autonomy? Were they just getting their feet wet, seeing if a provider was interested? Give us kind of a catch up to the present day, and then we'll start with the present stuff that you guys are looking at.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's probably a couple things that were driving that. Number one, I think they generally just didn't know, and they wanted to see, maybe it was a test, right? They wanted to see how much we knew about it. I think there was a genuine learning piece. They look at us, whether it's Covenant or anybody else, our shippers look to us to give them, obviously a product, a service, right? Safe delivery and affordable delivery of freight. But then they also look to us to give them ideas and suggestions on sort of what to do. Now, in a way, I'm glamorizing a little bit because, carriers like, listen, deliver my stuff. That's all I care about. But I think the shippers of the day are looking at things a little bit more holistically. They're looking at providers that can do brokerage, they can do warehouse management, they can do shipping, because Covenant is more than just a trucking company. We also operate warehouses and managed freight and solutions like that. So I think they just wanted to know that we were staying on top of it, right? They needed to make sure that they were working with a carrier that understood everything. And so those RFPs, maybe some of them were very sort of checking some boxes, right? I asked some green questions because that's what my leadership wants me to do. But I think a lot of them also genuinely, authentically, wanted to see what it was maybe that they could do. There's this term I use, you don't know what you don't know. It took me a while to sort of think about that for a second. But sometimes they didn't know if they were even asking the right questions. Maybe there was something out there they didn't even know about that, this RFP process could sort of help educate them.
And then the first thing is emissions. I remember I started at FreightWaves in 21, came from fleets. I never knew what Scope 3 emissions was. I thought Scope was a mouthwash. And so then it still is.
Yeah.
Shout out for Scope. I guess, if they have a sequel or a threequel. But when we're looking at the very first steps, the emissions aspect, talk about that because I think it's fascinating. From a fleet side, you all are almost on the same page because if I'm idling my truck, I'm burning money, I'm making emissions. It's almost like this fascinating thing where people would think it's a diagonal antagonistic when in fact it's part of doing more with less and saving money.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about it like this. Yeah. Let's talk about, for those out there that don't know what Scope 1, 2, and 3 is. So doesn't matter what kind of company you are. If you're Starbucks or Target or Walmart or Procter & Gamble or Colgate, Scope 1 is the emissions directly associated with the business that you're in. So manufacturing, operating your own trucks, maybe even the airfare of your employee, the airline emissions that come from when your employees take trips somewhere. Anything in your private fleet, those types of things. So anything involved, if you're in manufacturing, what it took to procure materials, that sort of thing. Scope 2 are the emissions associated with the power that you burn. So if you're just a general corporate headquarters and you're running the lights, you're running, the HVAC system, all of that power, or if you're in manufacturing, all the different warehouses and operations that you buy power from. So that collective number can be converted into kilowatts and you can come up with a carbon number associated with that. So that's Scope 2. Scope 3 is arguably the hardest one to measure. That is your carbon footprint associated with all of the people that you buy things from. So if you're a shipper and you hire Covenant to haul your freight, if I go from point A to point B, the emissions from my truck are part of your Scope 3. So if I have, say, 100 metric tons of carbon associated with all the freight that I deliver for you in a month, that's counted on my Scope 1, but for you as the shipper, it's your Scope 3. So again, this is a keynote presentation. Don't need to get into the nuances of, Matt, that's double counting some numbers. I think when you really start diving into emissions, there is a lot of double counting and assumptions and sort of some shuffling of numbers on a spreadsheet that gets a little confusing. But at the end of the day, that's the difference between Scope 1, 2, and 3. So shippers are looking to us to help them reduce their Scope 3.
And so now we have the thing where it's like, hey, I'm suddenly being told by investors and other people, I need to get green. Oh, crap. I need to help and see if the providers are helping me also get green because it's a part of my overall emissions. And so now within your role, let's talk about some of the ways fleets are reducing emissions. I remember talking to you about there was some cool biodiesel, there's EVs, there's hydrogen, there's different ones. Let's talk about some of the stuff you all looked at over that period from when you first got this stuff saying, hey, we kind of got to these guys want this stuff, to kind of where we're at now. What are some of the trends that you've seen?
Before I answer that, though, we got to answer one other thing. You started to talk on, I thought you were going to ask me this question is, they think they want it, or they know they want it, but they don't know how much it costs, right? Yeah. So the chief sustainability officer is saying, hey, procurement department, go out and find me some green shippers. And this guy or girl is incentivized on carbon reduction at a corporate level, at a global level, at an enterprise level. The procurement folks are incentivized on, guess what?
Reduction in costs.
Bingo. No more calls, please. We have a winner. And so those two things don't always go in alignment with each other. So I'm just telling you, Thomas, and it would be interesting for the listeners out there. I would love to get into a debate with them, but the green solution is never the less expensive solution. Never. Now, you can get kind of close to cost parity with diesel, and there are a lot of ways to do that, but you always have to be prepared to spend more. And so then the question becomes, which one do I do? Because full-on zero emission, that's really expensive. But there's a lot of other things kind of in between. diesel and zero emission, right? I'm on the board of directors of this organization called the NACFE, the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. It's a nonprofit dedicated to working with all fleets, mostly in the heavy duty space, but not exclusively, to try to figure out ways that we can decarbonize with, this is where we are today. Zero emission is over here. And then there's this thing called the messy middle, which is all the stuff that's going on today that may not be zero emission, but until zero emission becomes affordable at scale, we have these solutions here like electric auxiliary power units and aerodynamics and maybe putting nitrogen in the tires or using different flavors of biofuels, B5, B10, B15, B20, even B100, compressed natural gas. There's all these sort of different sort of things you can do here in the middle. And that's where we are right now because delivery of freight, zero emission, full on battery is expensive. It's got logistical challenges and we've got power challenges. We could have an entire keynote just on the challenge, the pros and cons of electrification. But until then, I work in this area, what I call and what NACFE calls the messy middle, which is solutions that we can do today that aren't perfect, but they're better than this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a factory. So a fleet has a tractor, is a mobile factory on 18 wheels. You have a driver, imagine you only run one shift for 11 hours. You make a team driver, that's 2 shifts. And so, if I can't afford a battery electric yet, I can also try to run more for less or continually use it. So that's why I'm thinking autonomy. I wonder if autonomy sits in the spectrum in terms of the path to zero emissions, from emissions to none, because, what if I can utilize some automation? Then I'm kind of not having that vehicle sit and idle and burn. It's actually using more, and then maybe I can get more for less. Is that one of the things when we're thinking of it, or is it just strict EV powertrain?
No. You're spot on in many respects. So we went down we did a deep dive into autonomy starting 4.5 years ago. We looked at Too Simple, which was one of the first ones, not here anymore. Kodiak, Aurora, Torque, Waymo, who am I leaving out? There's even new ones now like Bot Auto and Plus AI and some other ones. But Covenant is publicly traded. We're large, but we're not the biggest. We're about number 37, 38 on Transport Topics Top 100. But where we are number 1 is we do have the largest expedited fleet. The reason that's important, Thomas, is because we got into the autonomy space because we understand that keeping a truck on the road, there is a sustainability element to it, right? You can keep that truck moving. That truck was designed to drive all of the time and really never be turned off. And so when you have 2 drivers in there, you can achieve that. You can get things there quicker, but you can also keep that asset moving. And as long as that asset is moving, as it's not sitting and idling, there's a little bit of a sustainability and an investment, right? A return on investment component to that. And that's exactly what autonomous is. It's a way to keep a truck on the road, moving all the time. When that truck is sitting still, it's costing us money, and we're not earning money off of it. So that's one of the reasons we initially got into it. Where we are today, flash forward to 2025, we're still very bullish on it. We're not going to take that step immediately. I think a lot of us are taking kind of a wait and see approach. There's some things specific about Covenant that make us a little bit different than the larger carriers. We don't have this massive terminal network where we can launch autonomous vehicles and then receive them and then take that trailer and put it on what we call the final mile and kind of take it to where it's going. So there are a lot of things that kind of prevent us from going into that. But, we do feel like autonomy is going to be there at some point in the not too distant future. There are going to be a lot of sort of sustainability sales points on it. That truck will operate more efficiently in terms of its overall use. There's also the idea that when you think about the efficiency of which that truck moves down the road, because it's got longer to get from the East Coast to the West Coast or vice versa, you can slow it down a little bit. Like I've always read that the perfect MPG, the perfect speed of a truck is like about 62 miles an hour. That's that perfect balance between aerodynamics and fuel economy and engine RPMs. And so if you don't have to drive, if you can drive 58 instead of 63 over the period of 1,000 miles, then you're going to get a little bit better increase in fuel economy. So there's a lot of sort of games you can play with sustainability and autonomy, but there's a lot of reasons to do it. sustainability and asset utilization is just one of them.
I was talking to you before this as well.
Safety, some other things to my friends out there in the autonomy.
Throughout the safety part,
yeah,
too.
there's a lot of safety, benefits that we expect to get from it. It's a great technology. A lot of regulatory hurdles right now, but yeah, it's coming.
Think of it like I wanted to use that house analogy. I was saving that for my back pocket. So the autonomous vehicle maker is just like a home builder. Here's this really nice house. It's going to be amazing. It's efficient. But I also still need a neighborhood. So if I'm a large fleet, do I have a terminal system? How am I going to set that up? How am I going to operationally handle that? So it's almost like we've made the house of the future. We don't have the permitting and we don't know how we're going to hook up the water lines and run some power cords. And so from a large fleet standpoint, this is going to be really cool tech, but we're kind of like in that messy middle, even in the autonomy space, where we're going to hash out when the rubber meets the road.
No pun intended. Yeah. So like, for example, some great examples in that, how am I going to refuel it? If the truck breaks down, what's the breakdown procedure? Is there going to be some network of autonomous sort of recovery sort of people that kind of can find a truck pulled over to the side of the road that there's no driver in it? There's this whole, launching and landing. So the idea of doing a walk around, a pre-trip inspection, who's going to do that? Is if I'm a large carrier with a large terminal sort of density across, if I'm FedEx or UPS or Werner, I've got terminals all over the place, so it would make sense for me to automate certain lanes. And I have people at those terminals that can help do those plumbing and electrical tasks using your very astute housing analogy. So, yeah, I mean, there's just, it's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. But again, still some hurdles, to go after. But we're very excited about the potential it can bring to the industry.
Well, let's switch gears too. You recently released a report on sustainability, shown for the year 2024. Give us some of the highlight, because it's also really great to see fleets show their work by the numbers. That way, for some of these customers who are like, oh crap, someone's breathing down my neck, a sustainability person in another, large multinational countries, you can at least give them something. Tell us a little about what some of y'all worked on. Let's dive through the report a little bit and kind of what are some of the key takeaways?
So whether you call it an ESG report, environmental social governance, or a CSR report, which is corporate social responsibility, or an annual sustainability report, there's a lot of sort of labels these things have. And to some extent, they're all the same, right? It's what a company is doing specifically as it relates to the environment, their people, and the communities where they live. And there's also a governance piece to it on an ESG report, which is really like a 10K, right? It kind of like, this is how our board is structured, and this is kind of how we're governed, and these are the way we make decisions. And so, an ESG report, because I get this question a lot, what's the difference, Matt? Why don't you have an ESG report? An ESG report's like a CSR report on steroids. It just contains some additional measurement information. There's a lot of different reporting standards, TCFD and SASB, and where you have different ways that you report your emissions and your EEOC numbers, like how many, demographic stuff about your employee makeup and things like that. So we do a CSR report. So it's a very clear philosophical position on a little bit about our company, the way we look at our people, the way we look at the communities where we work, and the way we look at the impact that we make on our environment. Because listen, at the end of the day, we're driving a diesel truck. We're part of one of the largest sort of producers of carbon when you look at all of the amount of carbon that comes out of vehicular transportation, whether that's planes, trains, trucks, or automobiles. And, how are we thinking about it? Why are we thinking about reducing that number? What are we doing ourselves, right? What kind of investments are we making? What sort of investments and advocacy are we doing with our competitors, right? What kinds of things are we doing with the OEMs? What kind of things are we doing kind of in the bigger picture in order to, a rising tide floats all ships? We can't just look at this as what are we doing as Covenant? What are we doing collectively as an industry? And I got to tell you, Thomas, that's one of the things I love about my job is there's a guy I got on speed dial at a fleet that is significantly larger than us. We compete against them all the time. He and I are more peers than we are competitors. Now, we can talk about a particular technology. Let's just say 100% biodiesel. There's a product out there from a company called Optimus Technologies that has 100% biodiesel. It's a near zero emission event. I've got a friend that operates a very large 18,000 assets on a private fleet. And I've got a friend that operates a for-hire fleet. One's my competitor, one's just somebody that we haul freight for. And sometimes the three of us get on the phone and we talk about what's working, what's not working, what can we do to help use our collective influence to talk to a particular fuel provider to make this product available in more places across the country so that we can all use it together. And we're peers at that point. But then when the conversation goes to, hey, we're all investing in this product from Optimus, what did you pay for that? Well, that's when we can't talk about things, right? Because, it's a little collusion, it's inappropriate. And so we're more peers, though, than we're competitors. And so that's one of the things I like about my role. Another place where that happens a lot is safety people. Safety people are very much peer related. I know that the safety people at Covenant's organization have very close relationships with the safety departments at our competitors. And so, sustainability is one of those areas where we can kind of share a lot of data, share a lot of information, share a lot of lessons learned and what works. And so in our CSR report, which is the question that you asked, you can go to our website, you can download it. So we just published our 2024 report, which is everything that we did in the prior year. That's the way these reports work. And you can see kind of what we're doing, where we're going. We talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing next year and then what we're going to be doing kind of over the next 5-10 year period.
Well, it reminds me of the autonomy space. They compete, but they're also almost peers in that they all want the same thing, which is this tech has to be good, this tech has to work. If one of us screws it up, it's going to impact all of us. And so kind of in the large fleet space, I wonder with OEMs too. I came from a Daimler event. They were talking about stuff. They love the fact that Cascadia is 42% market share right now in the US, but that uncertainty, is that something where do OEMs reach out to large fleets too and they say, hey, Matt, I saw your report. I know you guys really like this and that. We're looking to do some stuff. Do they ever kind of help with the fleets and give feedback? Because I can imagine if I'm a large fleet, maybe I'll think if I'm placing my next order, somebody who's willing to add a little feature or tweak a little something.
Yeah, it's a great question, Thomas. And let me start by mentioning one of the OEMs that you talked about, Daimler. Daimler is actually about 94% of our fleet. We love Daimler. It's a great partner for us. Each fleet probably disproportionately has a particular OEM that they do more business with than others. For whatever reason, they're all good, right? We found that Volvo and PACCAR, they're all good, but we have a very deep relationship with Daimler. Years ago, so Daimler has these what's called fleet councils. They have what's called on-highway council. They have electric council. I believe they have a safety council. So Covenant was on their EV council. We haven't actually had a meeting in a couple of years, but early on when EV was sort of entering sort of the realm of conversation and they were in the early stages of developing their truck, they would bring about 20 of us to Portland, Oregon, which is where their North American headquarters are. And we would all sit in this big room and we would have an agenda, but we would all talk. And man, you get a lot of senior level fleet people in a room. They all like to talk, right? And they were fascinating conversations because we would talk about things. Well, if you had an electric vehicle, would you want a charging port on the left side and the right side, or just the right side or the left side? Would you like us to, do you even need to have a sleeper cab in the back? Can we just make these on day cab structures? Because, the idea is that the range of these things is so short, it doesn't really make sense to put the extra weight on a sleeper because you're probably not going to be sleeping in it in the first iterations of this truck. We talked about, all kinds of things that we, charging and all kinds of other sorts of things that we needed to get on board with and share ideas. And ultimately, they took all that feedback and they went out and developed the first truck. The first e-Cascadia, and today that continues to be a great product. And we don't have any electric trucks in our fleet right now, but they make a great product. They all have EVs at this point, but the OEMs are very connected to us in the field. PACCAR, does a great job. They have an innovation lab out in Sunnyvale, California, led by a good friend of mine, Paul Kavanovich. They routinely have people out and they solicit feedback from the carriers because ultimately we have almost more expertise than they do because we operate these things, thousands, tens of thousands of these things day in and day out. So they have a lot to learn from us.
You gave me there's such a great story with the PACCAR guys. They've got like 8 or 9 dynos where they just try to break their engines. And one of them is they have a Florida setting. And so they'll just run these things trying to break them. And then when they break them, they got a little CSI crew that looks at it and sees where the tolerances were. So I talked to Daimler about that and I was like, do you guys try to tear up your trucks as well? Do you have a Florida setting? And they're like, well, we'll do tracks and they run on their little fleets. But it was fascinating to see when they talk about OEM automotive grade. even when we're talking about these newer technologies like battery and autonomy, these folks take them through the ringer. And so you got to ask the large fleets who are the customers, because they may have some stuff that nobody knows about, and then you can put that into the product. So I love the fact, I guess, kind of bow tying this all together, is that at the largest level of fleets, there's also a greater opportunity, because the size allows you to also give feedback and receive feedback, compared to a lot of times at FreightWaves, the smaller fleets, where you're almost waiting for something to happen, the water temperature changes or bits of stuff to come down, and then you're reacting instead of being proactive.
Yeah, well, you know, I mentioned Daimler. Let me talk about another a company. Just to, again, you know, in fact, I've met several. I've learned a lot about their product from watching some FreightWaves events. But Cummins does a lot of engine research. They have this building dedicated to blowing an engine up. We went there one day. We just happened to be there on a day. They were trying to redline an engine just to see when it would throw a rod. So there was this room that had, like, I don't know, 12 inches of plexiglass, and there was, you know, they had a, you know, exhaust pipe going out, and, you know, water coming in and fuel coming in, and they just had this engine. It was just revving. They were just kind of see what it was going to take, how much it could take before it sort of threw a rod. Now, we actually didn't get to see it, you know, throw a rod, but it's interesting because they do test these things 9 ways to Sunday to try to figure out everything potentially that could happen to it, because I guarantee you, if it can happen, a carrier out there will figure out a way to make it happen.
Exactly. The final, my favorite, was the Golden Pedal Award. They had an engine come in. The driver was driving a manual. He never took it out of first gear. It managed to survive. So that's the Golden Pedal Award. Let's look ahead. We're going to have to wrap things up. This has been an amazing keynote. Thank you so much for letting me pick your brain. Looking ahead, we've had some regulatory changes in the EV space. CARB is going into a low-carb diet now. OEMs are looking to Europe for a lot of the zero-emission stuff. What do you think in terms of just your personal opinion, after, you know, through conversations as well, doesn't necessarily have to be Covenant, what should we look at right now? Is it a thing where we're kind of in a sleep mode, a low-power mode, until we get woken back up? Or is it something where now with EVs and incentives have gone down, it's like a race to see who may be able to flourish through the cracks, while the regulatory environment has kind of not focused so much on a specific type?
So a couple months ago, I did this presentation on innovation, right? And the very first thing I had to do was describe what it was. So innovation or continuous improvements here, and full-on market disruption is over here. And then innovation is this space in the middle, right? And so the question you're asking is, what's coming? Like, is there anything truly disruptive from a sustainability perspective on the horizon? The flux capacitor, if your listeners are even old enough to know what that is, right? Like, is there something coming on down the road? And Thomas, I wish I could tell you that in all of the science experiments, all the things I look at, that there's some next generation propulsion system that's just going to change the way the market works. And I'm just not really seeing anything. Now, if you put everything on a scale of 1 to 10, I think zero emission, you got hydrogen and electric. Those are the things right now that make the most sense. Both of them have great applications, but also have their significant challenges. Electrification, you know, we're competing against AI data centers and the consumer's rising need for more and more electricity. So we got power problems and we got grid problems in the country. We also have these trucks that weigh a lot more, and so you can put less freight in the back. So there's some challenges with electric, but also it's a great solution for doing port work and for doing, you know, final mile delivery. Like, it's a great solution for that. Hydrogen has always been that next big technology that's 5 years away, but ultimately we always run into the fact of where are we going to get the hydrogen and where are we going to get it affordably, where are we going to get it green? If I had to guess, I'm really bullish right now. CNG's great where it works, where you can find, you know, the fuel. 100% biodiesel, I'm really a big fan of. You know, there is the ability, as long as you can keep the fuel temperature right, 100% biodiesel is a near zero emission event. So it's one of those things where you can run an ICE, internal combustion vehicle, where you have mechanics that know how to work on it, fuel that's available, you know, relatively, you know, freely, and, you know, you're using trucks that you already have, you know, that you already have inside your fleet. Pepsi has about 800 of these things. It's part of their decarbonization strategy. So I'm kind of bullish on that, and biofuels in general, even up to B20. You know, there's this event every year. In fact, I ran into you at ACT Expo this year, and that's kind of where you see the latest and greatest of everything. You know, I saw a lot of the messy middle, right? People that are making, you know, aerodynamic, you know, wheel covers and, things that close the gap between the tractor and the trailer.
The trailers with the axles that have juice and like injury, battery, range.
Range. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shout out to Range, to Ollie and his team. They're doing that. I think there's probably an application for that. And we can kind of wrap it up with this.
Yeah.
I think that there are the long haul for hire carriers like Covenant. Like the thing that makes most sense for us is to have one truck that operates on one fuel that we can fill up all over the country and have our technicians work on them all in the same way. That's not what the future looks like. We're going to have some CNG trucks, some electric trucks, some diesel trucks, some biodiesel trucks. I think the fleet of the future, we're going to have to accept the fact that there's got to be different parts of our kind of fleet portfolio. And I think that's kind of where we are today.
There's no longer one rig to rule them all.
And that is a great way to end this discussion.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
sir.
thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
That's going to be a wrap for this keynote. Don't worry, folks, though. We have a lot more great content coming up here at this Enterprise Fleet Summit.